45, that is the number of days Iran spent building its trap in the Strait of Hormuz. 45 days. Between 2,000 and 6,000 naval mines. Dropped in darkness by small IRGC boats, without maps, without coordinates, without any system that would allow Iran to find them again. And on day 45, the United States walked straight into it. 2 American destroyers. Through the narrowest point of the world's most critical energy corridor, where 20% of global oil supply moves every single day, where thousands of uncharted Iranian mines are still sitting on the seabed right now, waiting. Let that sink in. The United States did not wait for the mines to be cleared. The United States entered the minefield first. And Iran, the country that spent 45 days building that trap, did not fire a single shot. The trap has a new problem. Almost nobody is running the actual numbers on what that problem means. That is what this brief is for. I'm James Caldwell. This is Stratford Brief. Let's get into it. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to give you 4 things the headline coverage is not giving you. First, what Iran's mine trap actually is. Not vague references to mines in the strait. The specific weapons, the specific systems, the specific reason why clearing them is one of the most dangerous naval operations on the planet. Second, what the United States actually sent into that trap, because the 2 destroyers you saw in the headlines are not the clearance assets. What is doing the actual clearing is something most analysts are not talking about. Third, who is really losing while the political debate continues? And the answer is not just Iran, it is Seoul. It is Tokyo. It is every European household that opened an energy bill this month. That dimension is almost entirely missing from Western coverage. Fourth, the clock. Because the ceasefire expires before the mine clearance does. And what happens at that intersection is the question nobody in official coverage is forcing themselves to answer. Stay with me. Each layer changes how you read the one before it. Let us start with the numbers. Because the numbers are where the real story lives, not in what governments say, in what the math forces them to do. Iran has between 2,000 and 6,000 naval mines. That figure comes from U.S. intelligence assessments reported by the Jerusalem Post. $2,000 to 6,000. In a waterway 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Do that arithmetic slowly. 2,000 mines across 34 kilometers. That is 59 mines per kilometer of width. If the number is $6,000, which U.S. officials have not ruled out, you are looking at 176 mines per kilometer, packed into a channel through which, before this war, more than 100 vessels transited every single day. That is not a deterrent. That is a kill zone. And here is what almost nobody in mainstream coverage is explaining about these specific mines. They are not the simple contact mines of the Second World War, the ones that only detonate when a ship physically strikes them. Iran deployed at least 2 sensor-triggered systems identified by name in U.S. intelligence reporting. The Maham-3, a moored mine, tethered to the seabed, floating at a set depth in shipping lanes. It uses sensors. A ship does not need to touch it. It just needs to come within range. The Maham-7, a bottom mine. It sits on the seabed. It waits. When the acoustic signature, the magnetic field, or the pressure wave of a passing vessel reaches it, it detonates, passively, without anyone pulling a trigger. Both are manufactured in Iran. Both are documented. Both are currently somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran does not have a complete map of where either of them is. Let that sink in. The country that built the trap cannot find its own trap. U.S. officials told the New York Times that Iran mined the strait haphazardly. Small IRGC boats. Darkness. No systematic position recording. Commercial GPS devices in some cases. Manual compass bearings in others. Mines deployed and then lost. Drifted by sea currents away from their original positions. No chart, no map. No record that a clearance operation could work from. The trap was built. The trap cannot be undone. And Iran knew this when they agreed to a ceasefire that required the strait to reopen immediately. That is the clock running underneath every diplomatic statement of the last 2 weeks. 45 days to build the trap. 0 days to find it again. The clock is running. Before we go deeper, if this is the analysis you have been looking for, subscribe to Stratford Brief and turn on notifications. We do not report what happened. We report what it means, who decided it, and what the numbers forced them to do. New brief every day. Let's continue. Here's what the headlines gave you. 2 U.S. Navy destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz on April 11th. The USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., the USS Michael Murphy. The first American warships to enter the strait since the war began, February 28th. Here's what every headline left out. Those destroyers were not clearing mines. Almost nobody is running the actual numbers on this distinction. Retired U.S. Navy Captain Carl Schuster told CNN directly, "The destroyers are not the prime platforms for mine clearance work. They went through the strait to demonstrate that navigation was possible, to prove there was at least one corridor where surface vessels could operate. That is a signal. That is not a clearance. The actual clearance operation is something else entirely. And it is more sophisticated than anything Iran built its trap to defeat. Underwater drones, autonomous unmanned underwater vehicles, scan the seabed using sonar to detect hidden mines. They move through the water column, sweeping for the acoustic and magnetic signatures of the Maham 3 and Maham 7 systems. When they find a mine, they do not surface and report. They approach it, and they detonate it, remotely, without a single human diver in the water. From above, MH-60S Seahawk helicopters sweep the surface with laser-based detection systems, identifying floating mines and shallow threats that sonar might miss. Once detected, remote-controlled neutralization devices approach and destroy them. The destroyers provide air and missile defense cover for the entire operation, protecting the mine-hunting assets from Iranian interference, while the real work happens underwater and overhead. And according to Naval News, Avenger-class minesweepers, the USS Pioneer and USS Chief, were already transiting the Strait of Malacca, heading for the Middle East as of April 11th. The USS Tulsa, a littoral combat ship specifically equipped with a mine countermeasures package, had already transited on April 2nd. This operation was not improvised. It was sequenced weeks in advance. The destroyers entering the strait on April 11th were not the beginning of the operation. They were the visible part of an operation that had already begun. Here is the sentence that reframes everything. A mine trap works as a deterrent when the adversary cannot safely detect and neutralize the mines. The moment the adversary deploys systems that sweep the seabed by sonar and detonate mines remotely, the deterrent begins to collapse. Not all at once, mine by mine, meter by meter, until the corridor is wide enough for a tanker, then wide enough for 2, then wide enough for the 600 vessels stranded in the Persian Gulf for 6 weeks. The trap is not gone. But the trap is shrinking, and the clock that was running against the world has started running against Iran. 30 days left on the ceasefire window. The clock is running. Everyone is watching Tehran. Everyone is watching Washington. Almost nobody is watching Seoul, Tokyo, Brussels, and Riyadh. And that is precisely the mistake. Because if you want to understand what accelerates this conflict toward resolution or toward catastrophic failure, you need to understand who is bleeding while the two principals negotiate. Start with Asia. South Korea imports approximately 70% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan imports approximately 90%. Both are American allies. Both have economies running on Gulf oil that is not moving. Every day the strait remains functionally closed, those economies absorb energy costs that compound, not linearly, but exponentially, as manufacturers begin adjusting production schedules around supply uncertainty. That is not a secondary concern. That is the industrial base of two of America's most strategically significant Pacific allies, fracturing in real time. Move to Europe. The European Union has absorbed more than 22 billion euros in additional fossil fuel costs directly attributable to the disruption. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced emergency energy plans. French President Macron declared preparations for a multinational mission to restore navigation. British Prime Minister Starmer has been engaged specifically on the energy price dimension because European households are feeling this in their bills right now, not in quarterly reports, not in GDP projections, in this month's bills. And here is the dimension that Western coverage treats as background when it should be foreground. Approximately 50% of China's entire oil supply, not Iranian oil specifically, total oil, transits through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia ships through Hormuz. Iraq ships through Hormuz. The UAE, Oman, Kuwait, All of it moves through that 34-kilometer channel. China is the world's largest oil consumer. It cannot absorb the energy security cost of Iran's decisions indefinitely, and Beijing knows it. According to reporting from the days before the Islamabad negotiations, China had applied quiet diplomatic pressure on Iran, actively helping create conditions for those talks to occur. Beijing needs the strait open. It needs reliable Gulf oil flows, and right now it is getting neither. The entity that closed the Strait of Hormuz was not the United States, it was Iran. Iran laid mines. Iran imposed transit tolls. Iran created the conditions that disrupted not just American interests, but Chinese interests, Japanese interests, Korean interests, European interests, directly and severely. That asymmetry matters, because it means the pressure on Iran is not just American military pressure. It is the accumulated economic frustration of every major global economy watching 20% of its energy supply move through a waterway one country decided to weaponize. That pressure does not need to be announced. It simply needs to accumulate. And right now, 45 days in, it is compounding with every ship that is still not moving. The clock is running. For everyone. Let me give you the timeline that official coverage is not forcing itself to confront. The ceasefire is 2 weeks long. It began April 8th. That window closes around April 22nd. The mine clearance timeline, according to independent naval analysts, is 8 to 14 weeks for full clearance of a minefield this size. That assumes continuous operations with the assets now deployed. No Iranian interference. A minefield closer to 2,000 mines than 6,000. Do that arithmetic one more time. 2 weeks for the ceasefire. 8 to 14 weeks for full mine clearance. Those timelines do not fit inside each other. Not even close. The ceasefire will expire before the strait is fully cleared. Not maybe. Definitively. What that means is brutally specific. The next round of negotiations, if Pakistan can reconvene them, will happen over a strait that is partially cleared, partially open, and still partially mined. The question of who controls the clearance, who controls the corridor, and who decides which ships use it will be unresolved when that conversation begins. The Lloyd's List intelligence data tells you exactly where things stand in real time. Before the war, more than 100 vessels transited the strait daily. At the peak of the blockade, fewer than 10 per day. According to USNI news reporting, 15 transits on the day of the ceasefire announcement. Then 6, then 8. The numbers are moving. They are not moving fast enough. When daily transits reach 40 to 50 vessels, roughly a third of the pre-war average, the trap has been meaningfully degraded. When they approach 100, it has been effectively neutralized. Right now, we are nowhere near either threshold. And here is the number that ignites the next phase of this conflict, regardless of what is said in any press conference. 500 to 700 vessels are stranded in the Persian Gulf right now. Not a rounding error. Not an inconvenience. The industrial supply chains of South Korea, Japan, India, and Europe are tied to the cargo on those ships. Every additional day they cannot move. The pressure on every government with skin in this game to demand resolution compounds. That pressure does not pause for diplomatic timelines. That pressure does not pause for ceasefire windows. That pressure accumulates every single hour the clock runs. The clock is not a metaphor. It is 600 ships sitting in the Persian Gulf. It is 176 mines per kilometer on the seabed. It is 14 days until the ceasefire expires, and the clearance is still weeks from complete. It is a mechanism. And it is running. Let me give you the assessment the numbers demand. Iran built a trap that worked for 45 days. It stranded 600 vessels. It disrupted 20% of global oil. It forced a ceasefire. It brought Washington to a negotiating table it had not sat at with Tehran in decades. The trap was effective. And then the United States entered it. With sonar drones. With laser helicopters. With Avenger-class minesweepers en route. With 2 carrier strike groups providing cover. And Iran, which issued a warning and then went silent, is watching its most powerful strategic asset be dismantled mine by mine in a waterway it claimed permanent authority over. The trap is not a metaphor. It is thousands of pieces of Iranian metal on the seabed of the world's most critical waterway. And every day the autonomous drones find another one. The trap gets smaller, the corridor gets wider, and the leverage Iran built over 45 days of darkness erodes. The trap is shrinking, the clock is running. The 600 ships are still waiting, And the question this brief cannot answer, the one that no government has answered publicly, is this. When the ceasefire expires and the mines are still there, and the negotiations are still unresolved, who decides which ships pass through the corridor the United States just carved through Iran's trap? Because whoever answers that question controls the next chapter of this war. Watch the ship tracking data. It will give you the answer before any official statement does. The mainstream coverage tells you what happened. Stratford Brief tells you what it means. New brief tomorrow. I'm James Caldwell. Stay sharp.